Great. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Katie Hemphill, and I am the Associate Director of the McCarthy's Venture Mentoring Network at Northeastern University. Our mission is to match experienced entrepreneur and intrapreneur mentors with Northeastern-affiliated founders to help them scale and launch successful businesses. Before we get started today, I'd like to note that this session is being recorded. At this time, I ask that everyone but our speakers, please mute your microphones and turn off your cameras to minimize distractions during the discussion. If you have questions for our speakers, please feel free to post your questions to everyone in the chat, which is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The speakers will be monitoring the chat and answering as many questions as they can as the conversation progresses. Thank you again for joining us as we close out Global Entrepreneurship Week at Northeastern University with a very important conversation about intercultural competence as a useful tool in the startup workspace. For those of you joining our Global Entrepreneurship Week celebration for the first time, know that Global Entrepreneurship Week is the largest celebration of innovators and entrepreneurs in the world. Annually, over 40,000 events are scheduled in more than 180 countries, all made possible by the Kauffman Foundation. This afternoon, I have the pleasure of introducing our incredible speakers, starting with our moderator, Faustina Cuevas. Faustina, if you'll just give a little wave to the audience, they'll know who you are. Thank you. Faustina was born and raised in the North Shore of Boston. She did her undergraduate and graduate degrees at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. It was at UMass where she became an active change agent in the fight for equity. Now, she brings this energy and experience to her clients through her independent consulting work. Thanks so much for joining us today, Faustina. On our panel today, we have TaLaya Clanton joining us from Northeastern University. TaLaya is a residence hall director here at Northeastern, and through this role, she has the responsibility of creating learning experiences for her students outside of the classroom. She has a BS in exercise science and an MED in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. Through her time working in higher education, TaLaya has found a passion for learning and educating others on how to better support those who hold marginalized identities. TaLaya, if you just want to give a wave to the audience, that would be great. Also joining us today is Ed Peña. Ed, if you want to give a wave to the audience, they'll know who you are. Thanks so much. Ed is Executive Vice President and Treasurer for the Liberty Mutual Group. In this role, Ed oversees a broad scope of corporate finance activities, including capital markets, liquidity, treasury operations, investor relations, and rating agency management. Ed is also co-chair of the LEADA Liberty's Employee Resource Group for employees of African descent and their allies. Thanks for joining us today, Ed. And last but certainly not least, we have Adam Saven joining us on the panel today. Adam Saven is the co-founder and CEO of PeopleGrove, a company whose mission is to ensure every student and professional has access to a community and connections needed to succeed. Today, they work with over 300 universities, companies, and nonprofits, including our very own Northeastern University. Without further ado, I will hand the virtual stage over to you, Faustina.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Katie. I am going to go ahead and share my screen with folks so we can have the presentation up. All right. So thank you again, Katie, for having me and having our wonderful panelists. It's really exciting to sort of be back at Northeastern. I used to work at Northeastern, so I'm glad to be sort of back and collaborating still with my colleagues at Northeastern. So today we're having a really amazing discussion around the importance of intercultural competence and what it means to sort of center that idea in the workspace, especially in the startup workspace, which is really important as you are building the idea of what you want your organization to be, and having this sort of at the forefront of that work is essential to the success of your organization, the success of your employees. So we wanted to sort of provide a grounding, right? Because I can probably ask 3 or 4 of you what your definition of intercultural competence is, and you might give me all different answers, and all of them might be right. So what we wanted to do today was probably just set the ground stage and set the groundwork about what we're going to be discussing and what we mean when we talk about intercultural competence. So we're going to just do a little brief presentation here, and then we'll get right into sort of the meat of why you're here, right? You want to hear the panelists. You want to hear these sort of tangible, real, practical ways of thinking about intercultural competence. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So a look at intercultural competence. So again, my name is Faustina, use she, her pronouns. And I'm really excited to be talking about this. And there's a million reasons probably why we should be talking about this, but I wanted to sort of provide my own lens as to why this is important. Our world is evolving. It's changing. We are serving more diverse communities within our workspaces. The workforce looks so different nowadays. The demographics are different. So we're changing, we're evolving. And as organizations, as as our workspaces are becoming more diverse and on all aspects, right? We're talking about racial diversity, we're talking about gender identity, diversity and expression. So you name it, it's changing. So we have to really be mindful of how we adapt to the times and changing times, and how we make and create spaces that feel welcoming to everybody. And we do have that responsibility. We want people that come into our workspaces to feel welcome, to feel like they belong, and that they find their place within your organization. I want to show this quick clip, and what I would love to ask, and again, we're going to use the chat feature here pretty intensely. So as you're watching this quick clip from the show The Office, this is the episode called Diversity Day. Some of you may be familiar, some of you may not be familiar, and that's okay. What I want you all to do, it's a very quick clip. What I want you all to be thinking about as you're watching this, and please feel free to use the chat feature to drop your thoughts, is what's happening here? What is your sort of interpretation about what Michael Scott is doing? And just to provide context, Michael Scott is the manager of this sort of office. And he did something that was problematic, and corporate sent in a diversity trainer, and Michael did not enjoy what the diversity trainer had to tell him about himself. So he took matters into his own hands. And this is where we are. So I'm going to show the clip. And again, I welcome your thoughts in the chat, because I'm going to be sort of sharing your thoughts as you're watching. So like I said, very short clip. I didn't see any comments in the chat, and that's totally fine. So there's many reasons that I showed you all this clip, because I found it, one, very interesting that Michael Scott chose to sort of engage his staff in this way, right? To sort of teach a lesson around diversity, difference, in a way where he's sort of making and forcing people to react to what's on people's foreheads. So this obviously is a clip as to what you should not be doing in your workspace, right? To do a training like this would be horrifying, because you're forcing your staff to use stereotypes and generalizations about communities. And obviously that's not what we want. But what I also find really powerful about this clip is that we do judge people, whether they have a sticky note on their or an index card on their forehead. We do judge people. We do stereotype. We do make assumptions about communities or people or individuals. And I think what's important here to know is that it's okay to make these assumptions. It's about understanding where those things are coming from and doing the work to unlearn that. Doing the work to recognize, like, I have biases. I have, preconceived notions about different communities, and how do I break those down? One tool that's really effective is intercultural competence, because intercultural competence sort of teaches us that there is difference, and it embraces that difference. It embraces cultural diversity. It elevates that. It celebrates communities that are different from your own. And that's why we want to talk about intercultural competence, because it's a really good tool to sort of break down some of those barriers, break down some of our preconceived notions about difference.
Are you ready?
All right, so I wanted to provide this definition by from Dr. Dearler Dardoff. It's really important that we sort of think about this framework and the idea of intercultural competence. So this is the definition I'm going to provide, again, just to have a working definition. So intercultural competence is the ability to develop targeted knowledge, skills, and attitudes that lead to visible behavior and communication that are both effective and appropriate in intercultural interactions. The development of intercultural competence involves gaining a more complex understanding of how one engages cultural diversity. So it's essential for us to think about this in three elements, or three arenas, or three buckets, however you want to sort of define it. And Dr. Darla Deardoff sort of talks about these three arenas. In order for us to have acquired intercultural competence skills and knowledge and wisdom, we have to think about it in these three areas. Knowledge is being that you're able to sort of understand your own cultural specific knowledge, your own cultural experiences, your traditions, your values, and then be able to sort of think about the ways that your culture engages with other cultures. So it's really important because it's about self-awareness, it's about acquiring culture-specific knowledge and sort of understanding the way that your culture engages with other cultures and minimizing potential intercultural conflicts. When you think about skills, it's about having listening skills, about observing, being patient, and being able to view the world from other people's perspectives. It's about hearing things that are so far, different and so unique that you've never heard of this culture, practice or whatever, and being able to be okay with that and be able to say, you know what, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to sort of digest this information that's new to me and be able to sort of celebrate that this difference, even though it's something that you have never partaken in or understand, you're able to at least be observant and be able to sort of step into another culture's perspective and ideas. And then attitudes. I think that's just the most basic one, which is just valuing other people's cultures, valuing difference, and seeing it as something that should be celebrated and honored and validated, instead of seeing it as something that should be judged and should be ostracized. So Dr. Deardoff sort of talks about, once you've sort of mastered these three areas, you are pretty much going to be set for success in thinking about intercultural competence and being able to apply this in your daily work, being able to apply this in your workspace. And it's really important to understand that whether you're applying this in your personal life or in your business, that it really is important for us to understand these frameworks so that we understand what drives our behavior, what are our value systems, what are the ways that we think and engage the world. Because when you don't do that, intercultural conflict will arise, and it makes it really challenging to be in a workspace where there's intercultural conflict. And you as a manager or supervisor, CEO, you're going to have to try to figure out how to navigate these intercultural conflicts. So really, this framework is a mechanism to be proactive so that you don't get to that place where you are dealing with intercultural conflicts and you have to sort of navigate that. But the reality is that we will have them. And it's about trying to think through, when that time comes, how do you navigate that? How are you able to listen? Again, right, that skill around intercultural competence. How are you able to listen and be compassionate about difference? So I wanted to share some possible intercultural conflicts that may arise, right? So I'm going to use the American culture, right? We all live here in the US. So I'm going to use the American culture as an example and compare that to sort of other cultures and other experiences. So in the American culture, we value timeliness, right? So today, this program started right at noon. Mostly, the majority of folks were right on time. We were right here at noon, because that's something as Americans or the American culture, we do value that. That's something that's sort of part of our, DNA. But in other cultures, timeliness might not be seen as a big deal. It actually might be seen as something that is not the main thing. It's about spending time together or being together with people. And it doesn't matter if you're right half an hour late, 20 minutes late, as long as you show up, right? Because they value sort of like community and that space together, rather than if you're on time or or we start right out the meeting at a particular time. So that's a one difference that I've sort of observed. And then individualistic society versus a collectivist society. In America, we are very individualistic, right? Which is really interesting because there is a lot of research around individualistic societies have higher divorce rates. That's due to the fact that in individualistic society, it's very much like nobody wants to compromise, right? It's like, what do I want? What do you want? And are we going to come to an agreement? No, you have to bend to me. I have to, you have to bend to that other person. So no one's willing to compromise. In collectivist societies, there's more of a we thinking. It's more of like, how are we going to figure this out? How are we going to compromise? How are we going to come to an understanding? So more societies are, societies out there are more collectivist societies, and it operates very differently in thinking about that. Smiling, right? That's something you've seen me smile since we started this whole thing. Smiling is a big part of our culture. Is how we express joy. It's how we express a form of happiness. In other cultures, smiling is not necessarily attached to any sort of expression. It's more of like, I'll smile when I want to. It's not necessarily about expressing joy. So I'm sure we can all think of a time like we saw somebody or we worked with somebody or we engaged with somebody that really didn't smile a lot. And we probably made assumptions about them, like they're not happy, they're having a bad day. But in all reality, is there something else going on here? Is it just part of their culture that smiling is not really attached to happiness or joy or anything like that? And then finally, eye contact. And I wanted to share a personal experience about this one. So again, in American culture, we value eye contact, right? It's the way we sort of let people know we're paying attention. When we shake someone's hand, it's sturdy. We look at you in the eye. In other cultures, it might be a sign of disrespect to look at somebody in the eye because of authority. Maybe it's an authority figure. It's an elder. It's someone you respect. So you tend to not look at people in the eye. And I want to just share a quick story of that I had an experience I had in Northeastern. I was interviewing students for one of our office assistant roles. And I remember the student would not look at me in the face. I was asking this person questions and we were, then they were doing a good job of answering everything. And we had a relationship. So I felt comfortable enough at the end to ask this student and say, hey, you didn't make eye contact at all. And I'm wondering why that is. And this person told me, well, you're an authority figure and you're somebody I respect. And that's a form of disrespect in my culture. It's me showing you respect by not looking you in the eye. And I had to shift my whole mindset around eye contact. That one moment allowed me to sort of think about the way I have valued some of these things and made sure to think about, when have I prejudged people based on body language, based on things that I perceive as professional? And can I think back and say, maybe this was a cultural difference and I didn't take the time to value that? At this moment, I want to ask my panelists to see if they have any other experiences they like to share, examples of potential cultural conflicts that you all have had.
Sure, Faustina, I'll jump in here. And first off, thank you for kind of giving us this framework with which to have the conversation. It's very helpful, to have that overlay. So thank you. I guess one small anecdote that I can share is, this summer, after kind of the series of unfortunate events across the country, in racial justice, we at Liberty had, a fair amount of conversations, right, about racial equity, social injustice, right, with very much a lens on the Black community, right, and that was generally well received across the company. Frankly, it was needed, right, in our population, our community needed to see that conversation happening with our broad leadership, and have it be something that cascaded across the entire company. But one place where we had to moderate our language or find an intersectionality was actually with, as we were addressing the Black community, right, and the Black Lives Matter movement, among other elements, we had to make sure and stop and make sure that we weren't alienating our community that also cared about our veteran community and our police community, right? Because what we didn't want was to kind of go out and send a message that we supported one community, right, and then have that be perceived as something that we were not supporting another different community, right? So I think over the course of the summer into the fall, we made a big effort to kind of find that intersectionality, find the commonality across those communities, make sure that people understood what our corporate values were and our cultural values were. And all that culminated with just a really fantastic event with a woman who was the first Black pilot who graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy, and LEDA, the organization that we referenced earlier that I co-chair, co-sponsored that event with Valor, which is our employee resource group for employees in the military and who are backing kind of police as well. So I think it was a real nice learning point for us and for our company to kind of find that intersectionality between those communities and make sure that our employees and our customers ultimately understood where our values really were.
Thank you so much, Ed. Yes, intercultural competence is also about bridging those gaps, right? How do we bridge these things? How do we bring people together to sort of find that commonality, find that common ground, find that common humanity, which I feel like we've sort of lost as a society. So we need to really get back to that. Thank you so much, Ed. Anyone else in our panel?
I can,
Um,
go ahead. No, please.
all right. So I think it's important when you talk about intercultural conflicts is understanding that like just because a person holds an identity doesn't mean that they necessarily speak for everyone who holds that identity. And for me, I personally had an experience and it was completely wrong. And I realized in the moment we were having a conversation at work about, I actually don't know what the specific conversation piece was. We were speaking about like how different groups perceive this conversation piece. And I looked to my friend or my coworker who I knew was Jewish. And I said, oh, you're Jewish. What is the Jewish perspective? And I was like, oh my gosh, that was wrong. That was a microaggression. And she was like, yes, it was. And I apologized in the moment, but I realized like, it's not fair for me to assume in that moment that just because she held that identity that she speaks for the entire population of people. And so I just had to sit in that and I apologize in the moment, which is what you do when you make a mistake like that. You apologize in front of everyone. And then I had to go back and reflect on myself of like what caused me to assume that she would know that. And so you just kind of have to do your homework sometimes and go back and reflect.
Thank you so much, TaLaya. Adam?
Yeah, I mean, first I can maybe share a bit about our company's DNA. So as a company, 50% of our employees are headquartered in India. The remainder are scattered across the United States. And as a result of that, something that has become very clear is how each and every word matters. So take the word diversity. What that means for our employees in the US is very different from what it means to our employees in India. And so when we're having these bridging conversations across cultures, we also have to think about like, what does that word even mean in the context we're talking about? Because otherwise, you will find yourself having intercultural conflicts. The way we were talking about diversity and the things that we needed to do to improve at PeopleGrove in the US was very different from considerations that we have to factor in for our team in India. Another kind of thing that I've shared previously is for our team in the US and for our whole company, a goal is that every employee is excited to come to work every day. So then you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't someone be excited to come to work every day? Is it because they feel like their worth, their sense of belonging is different from other employees? And this became quite clear actually in the political climate environment. We have some employees that practice Islam or are part of the LDS church. And when we were seeing a new Supreme Court justice arrive that was perhaps more pro-life, they wanted to celebrate, to be honest, but they felt uncomfortable doing so because that may not be celebrated in startup cultures. I don't share that as there's like a right or wrong answer, but rather these are complex topics and understanding where people are coming from, their definition of some of these topics is just so important. Otherwise, you risk not every employee feeling like they have the same sense of belonging.
Thank you so much, Adam and TaLaya as well. TaLaya, I thank you so much for just naming, when you make a mistake, just apologize. If there's a cultural conflict and you make a generalization, apologize. I think that's a great example of vulnerability and just honoring your mistake. Adam, I really appreciate what you said, especially because we don't want to alienate people in the workspace. We want to be able to have people feel like they can be their true selves. But also, Adam, I really appreciate the way that you're able to know your employees. The fact that you know religious practices and views is really important, right? Because we don't want to leave people out of the workspace either, where they feel like they can't bring a part of their identity. And that's belonging. Belonging is saying I can bring my whole identity to this workspace and know that there's a space for me to exist. So thank you, Adam and PeopleGrove for having that, because I think that that's essential. And it really, we shouldn't be moving into a world that honors belonging, and we should leave inclusion, I think, behind, because inclusion doesn't really fit the goals that we're trying to move towards. We are moving towards a world of belonging. So thank you so much. And someone said, Michelle Rapp said, I like the focus on belonging. Me too, Michelle. Me too. And then, this basically says to ensure productive and fruitful intercultural relationship, it's important to understand that one's own way is not necessarily the right way. It's just different, right? So this idea around we've always done it this way, this is just how things are, well, this is the policy, doesn't necessarily fit the new way we want to think about these things, right? We want to be more open, more flexible. We want to have a sense of belonging. So that means reevaluating the way we've done things, reevaluating the ways we want to do things, and being proactive about that, so that we're not having reactive conversations around things that are happening in our workspace, that we're thinking about it proactively and bringing some of those things into the way we operate in our organizations. This sort of touches upon what TaLaya said, right? The mistake she had made, which I really appreciate her being vulnerable with us, is no cultural group is homogenous, right? So even within the Jewish community, everyone is different. We're not a monolith within any grouping. No one is, there's so many different subcultures within a culture. So try not to generalize. Instead, use the information you've gathered to be able to be proactive about intercultural relationships, and avoid intercultural conflicts by understanding the nuances of identity, the nuance of cultural diversity, and being able to be, sort of forthcoming where you have to learn, where there's gaps, where do you have blind spots, and being willing to engage and educate yourself and have dialogues like this, right? Engage in conversation, train yourself, educate yourself, read materials, and constantly continue your learning. I want to show this quick video, very like 30 seconds, by Dr. Darla Deardorff, who is a scholar I've been talking about. If you want to continue your learning around intercultural competence, this is who you want to read about.
So there are a number of reasons why intercultural competence is important, and it depends on the context and who you're asking. It can range anywhere from the importance of needing this for employability to social integration. For me personally, it can be summed up by the quote from Martin Luther King Jr., who said, "We must learn to live together as brothers or perish together as fools." So it's not something optional. We must learn to live together through this intercultural competence in order to address the problems that face us as humanity.
Sweet and to the point. Let's try not to perish together as fools, right? Let's be better. Let's be upstanders. Let's be people who are willing to engage in cultural diversity. Now I have some questions. I'm going to stop my screen here from sharing. And I have some.
So there are a number of reasons why intercultural competence is important. And it depends on the context and who you're at.
All right, here we go. So I have some questions for our panelists, and I'm also, as the panelists are speaking, I invite the audience to use the chat feature to ask questions, and we'll try to get to many questions as possible. I do just have some already set questions for the panelists, but please drop your questions in as they're talking. If things are coming up for you, feel free to use that chat feature, and I'll make sure that we can read some of those before our time together ends. So this question's for all of our panelists, so we have a grounding, we have an understanding of sort of intercultural competence. So my question for all of you is, how do we apply intercultural competence as a tool in the workspace, right? That's what we're here. So what would be something that you would share with the audience here about how do you apply these things? How do you make them tangible? And anyone can start.
For me, I think it is important to understand that everyone is coming to the table with different levels of knowledge. And so having a conversation about identity and different identities that people hold and how they show up in the workplace, and also doing your own self-work of learning about other identities and what that looks like and how that could be integrated into the work that you do. I personally, as a supervisor, when I'm talking to my students, I like to ask them questions about their personal lives, how they view different things, to kind of show them like that I am interested in learning more about you. I also try to be vulnerable myself about the identities that I hold. And so kind of creating a space where that conversation is normal and that they can show up as their full self when they come into the workplace. I think that's a really good place to start.
Thank you, TaLaya.
Yeah, I mean, here at PeopleGrove, frankly, it's a lens by which every decision we make has to be the case. I'll give you an example. So like a lot of startups, we have a weekly all hands. The entire company gets together, we give updates, etc. And historically, we did that all hands in the morning US Pacific time, because that's where most of us are based. Not recognizing that for our entire India team, frankly, that made them feel like they were a lesser part of the company, that only they had to show up at 9 p.m. for this all hands. That was an important learning lesson on how intentional, how thoughtful we have to be with each decision we're making, that we're recognizing these dynamics. The same, frankly, is applied when we have company events. I felt very strongly early on as a company that we didn't want to have, for lack of a better term, the startup bro drinking culture as we're thinking about creating this diverse team. So we don't do that. When we hold company events, it's not centered around alcohol. It's not like, some sporty type thing. We want to make sure that everyone is excited to be part of it. So the truth is, it's not just one thing. It now is kind of this muscle part of your DNA by which everything we do, we think of, because otherwise you run the risk that not everyone feels like they're of equal worth at PeopleGrove. And the last thing I'll just share, when you then go to attract talent, well, those individuals are going to ask your employees, like, is this a place that celebrates belonging? Is this a place I want to be at? And if the answer isn't authentically yes, you won't be able to continue to build upon that. So it really is like a everything thing for us.
Thank you.
Yeah. Adam, I really like kind of how you ended there and in talking about building those muscles. Because I kind of look at this, and we kind of look at this as an organization from the following lens. And first is, you have to, this takes work, right? It takes work to understand oneself. It takes work to understand how, leadership's views ultimately get into the fabric of the culture of the company, of any organization. And all of that work has to get done, and that's a journey, right? And you can't shortcut that journey, and you can't shortcut that work. If you make progress that's too quick, it's very easy to undo that progress. So for us, it's kind of about giving our organization the tools and infrastructure in this space, right? A vocabulary they can use to ask the right questions, a vocabulary they can use to check themselves, like as TaLaya's story earlier. I think that's the first step. And then the second piece is holding yourself accountable. I think historically, all organizations have been somewhat reticent to actually say, all right, well, if we want to improve the employee experience for all our employees, right? And especially our diverse employees. But then they fall short of measuring that, right? And whether it be, actual representation or just kind of how the employees' experience is around diversity and inclusion, right? Companies sometimes fail to go that extra step. Now, thankfully, I think things are changing across corporate America, across different environments and different organizations. So I think we're making a lot of progress, across communities across the country. But that second piece is important as well.
Thank you so much, Ed. Yes, thank you all, because that's essential. And I think basically, to summarize what all three of you said, is really going back to what Dr. Darla Deardas said, that this is not optional. We should be thinking about this. It should be embedded in the work that we do, and we should be leading with that. With that in mind, I wanted to ask Adam and Ed, so you sort of started alluding to this a little bit, and I'd love for you to elaborate a little bit more about why do you think intercultural competence is sort of essential in thinking about the success of a business? So basically what you both started talking about a little bit. Why is it essential to the success of a business?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak first, and I mean, here at PeopleGrove, it's particularly important, right? Our objective, our mission is to support students of all backgrounds. How do you go about doing that if you don't have empathy or understanding within your employee base of what are those backgrounds, what are those experiences? That shapes the product. We're a software company, the product you build, even the language you use in the product. Is it inclusive? Is it welcoming to all? So that's one piece. We also work with universities who share a similar mission to help all students. And when they look at our company, they want to know that they're working with a partner that understands and appreciates these dynamics. We're not know-it-alls, but they know that we have a desire to be better and to learn with them. So from a business sense, that's revenue, right? In the absence of that, those are schools that may not want to work with us. Also, when you think about talent and innovating, sure, when we were an early startup, I won't lie, we were fairly homogenous because you use your referrals, you kind of hire people you know, but that doesn't scale. At a certain point in time, you have to have a more diverse set of perspectives, challenging viewpoints if you really want to grow and serve many more people. So you reach a point after like 5 people where you're like, we need to start prioritizing this. Otherwise, we won't be able to achieve our goals as a product, as a business, and bring in the right people.
Thank you, Adam. Ed, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, and really well said there. I would probably just boil it down to, it's essential to the survival of our organization. Full stop. For a lot of the reasons actually that Adam mentioned, right? We are in a constant war for talent. We financially have bondholders and investors who want to know that we are mindful in doing the right thing in this space. We have regulators that are asking the same kinds of questions. But more importantly, it's doing the right thing. And as maybe hokey as it sounds, that is one of our company values, and one that, where Liberty at least, I've been in startup environments as well, but Liberty at least has been, in business for over 100 years. And that's one of the founding principles of the organization, and one that's carried on, over time. So, without the focus on understanding our employees and their experience, understanding what our customers care about, we just won't be around for, the next generation. And if nothing else, as, the leadership of our company understands that, we have to preserve the organization as a going concern before anything else, right? Just basic principles. So.
Thank you so much. Yes, we have to evolve, right? We have to sort of change, even though an organization is 100 years old, like you have to evolve. You can't be doing what you did, 100 years ago. So absolutely, evolving and growing is such an important part of an organization thriving. So this question is for all of you. I think all of you sort of alluded to this in the intercultural conflict slide. So when these intercultural conflicts do arise, because they do, I wanted to ask and have you all share sort of your thought process. What do you do in those moments? How do you resolve the conflict, right? Because I think all of you named a conflict. So now what I'm asking is like, how do you resolve that? What do you do when those moments do arise? Because again, we don't want any side to sort of feel ostracized. So how do you find that balance, especially when it's difference in values and other pieces that are important around culture? So I want you, all 3 of you to sort of take a minute to think about what do you do in those moments? What is your thought process, and how do you try to come to a resolution? Because I do feel like some folks here might want to know, like, what does that actually look like in practice?
For me, a number of things come to mind, but I think listening is essential. especially from a supervisor perspective of like understanding what each person wants to get out of the resolution. So if someone wants understanding, then it's on you to kind of work to get to a place of understanding. Or if another person just wants to be heard, like working to get to a place where people can speak freely. And so I think that that's the first piece of it, but I also think about accountability. And I think I often hear the phrase of like meeting people where they are. And I think that that sometimes can be one-sided of meeting people who are less further along rather than meeting the people who are further along. And I think that that requires a little bit of self-work and making that an expectation in your company of like, this is important to us. And so we're all going to do this together to kind of understand where different people are coming from rather than just making it a suggestion or never revisiting the conversation when something happens.
Absolutely. Part of that continuous education. Thank you, TaLaya.
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly. I think a lot of times in those environments, I think you hear a lot, someone say, well, try on their perspective or try to see things from their point of view, which is critical and I wholeheartedly agree with. But kind of within that exact moment when you first hear whatever it is that might, make you feel any certain way, one kind of phrase that I frankly use a lot in my marriage at home is to assume positive intent, and I think it's a phrase that I've been using a lot of the past couple of years, and I just find very disarming, right? And it tries to seek that common ground where whatever someone is saying or doing is not really meant to hurt you, that they have some other idea in mind, some other kind of thought in their head that you might not be seeing just yet. So that's kind of the one thing that I usually try to go to as soon as I can when something gets me feel any sort of a way.
Thank you, Ed. I love the personal anecdote of like, this also works in the marriage. So thank you, Ed.
For me, it's a tough question because it's hard, you never want to generalize around some of these topics. Like on the one hand, it hasn't happened here, but obviously there's no room for hate speech. Like, we're not assuming positive intent there, we're acting quickly, but that's not usually what happens, right? It's usually misunderstandings. But at PeopleGrove, and I think all companies have continued to learn this, you have to take it seriously. Very seriously. Like, we have a company to protect, and the last thing you want is to have like an intercultural situation come up that you didn't take seriously, that you took lightly. And as a result of that, you might even open yourself up to like a legal situation that I'm sure no startup wants to, is well prepared to handle. So I don't want to sound too tactical here, but it's taking it seriously. Like when we hear of something, we have an HR person who immediately talks to both sides. We have to get to understanding, and then that informs what we do next. It's not always the same, but I would say what is always consistent is when something surfaces, we take it seriously. We don't like look at it and be like, oh, they'll be fine, or oh, that's a joke. Like we really do take it seriously, and it needs to be the case.
Absolutely. Thank you all, because you made really valid points. And it goes to sort of my last sort of general question. And again, audience, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat. I will be asking those momentarily. If you don't, I'll have more questions for the panelists, but I want to really make sure we have time for your questions if you have them. My last sort of question that really sort of wraps up this idea about the workspace, how do you navigate difference, how do you celebrate cultural diversity, how do you think about these things is, so we're thinking about it, we're here. So now how do you hire for racial diversity? How do you hire for cultural diversity and ensure that you retain folks within your organization, right? Because it's not only about inviting them and saying, you're welcome, we're going to hire more cultural diversity, more racial diversity. But then how do you retain folks once they're there? I think that second part for me is even more essential than getting folks through the door, because that usually is the easiest part. It's about how do you make them feel, again, going back to this idea of belonging, how do you make them feel like they belong? So the question is a two-part question. How do you hire for racial diversity? And then how do you retain folks? And I'm actually gonna have TaLaya lead us here.
So I think more to the why. Why do you want to hire racially diverse staff? Like, you have to look in your organization and understand why it's important. And then once you have the answer to that, I think that will help with the retention piece. I think it's important. I think it was Adam who mentioned, like, looking at your team that you have now. And the folks on the team, like, if they were to be asked about the culture of the team, what would they say? Would they speak positively? Would they share a negative experience? And with that, I think that will help you create a space that is that promotes retention, because what you don't want to do is hire someone and then you don't have a space where they can grow and learn as individuals, and then they leave in 6 months. And so I think you have to start with retention first before you focus on the hiring of the diverse staff. But I also think it's important when trying to recruit diverse staff is like looking at your mission and your vision. That's the first thing that I look at when I'm looking for a job, of like, is this embedded in the culture or the mission of the company? And so I think it's important to start there before you try to just hire people who look different.
Absolutely. I couldn't put that better myself. Thank you, TaLaya. Adam or Ed, or both?
I can start by just calling out recruiting, attracting talent, regardless of who you're trying to recruit, is hard as a startup. You know, I guess I can say quite fairly that PeopleGrove has less recruiting resources than Liberty and many other companies. So first off, it is just hard to recruit great talent. It is made even harder if you reach a point at your company and you look around and everyone looks the same. It becomes way harder to unwind the representation you have when you're further along than early on, because applicants also look at the DNA of your company. If you're 20 males and you have a ping pong table on your company's about page, you know, you may not be inviting people of all backgrounds to want to work there. So there are some things we got right in terms of gender representation. There are some things that we need to do a lot better on, and speaking firsthand, it makes it harder. Fast forward 5 years ago, wish I would have known all of these things in terms of how you build upon the base. The other thing is, well, once you've made a commitment to improve in certain areas, like, don't expect it to be easy. Don't expect you're going to post a job post and all the applicants are going to represent all the individuals you're trying to recruit. It doesn't happen that way. You really have to be intentional. So for example, it's sometimes building relationships with organizations that have built great communities. Like, we partnered with MLT to ensure a job post got in front of those of color. So I just want to first call out that we know we have blind spots, that self-awareness is important. And for those building their startup today, the earlier you can make sure you have a place that's inviting and representing of all, that will make this exercise 10 times less costly than down the road. And just expect it's going to involve rolling up your sleeves and being quite intentional.
Absolutely. Intentionality is key here, right? Because these are real people. These are real concerns. So absolutely being critical, being intentional, all of it matters. Thank you, Adam. Ed, do you want to add anything? And we do have an audience question. So.
Yeah, and actually, so I was just looking at that too, and I'll segue because, so again, I agree with everything that Adam and TaLaya said. And we just add that one thing that I try to, at least in conversations that I'm a part of, to make sure I address is, you'll still hear, unfortunately, people say, well, we can't find the talent, or we have a pipeline problem, which is so frustrating to hear. And what I've been telling people is, and this is definitely true at Liberty and other places as well, you know, it's not that we don't have bench strength in kind of across diversity, right? It's that that bench is somewhere, excuse the sports analogy here, is somewhere in the minor leagues or somewhere not on the team that's visible for everyone to see. And to me, it's kind of the need, there's a need to elevate people of color and diversity across the organization and make sure that they have a platform. And Faustina, if you could just let me, I would love to start at the next question because the one that's in the chat box.
Please
okay. That is $1 million question. And that is something that organizations, I've been at Liberty, I've been at a startup organization as well. I haven't seen anyone do well. You know, there's the alignment across leadership is very easy in comparison, because once you get down to kind of mid-manager level, at kind of the individual contributor level, it takes, again, to what I said earlier, right? You have to kind of do that work. You have to bring all of those people across that journey. It has to be really a part of the fabric of your kind of D&I journey as an organization. And that's not something that you build over a couple of virtual conferences or at a happy hour, right? It takes time and it takes years, and it takes having, you know, again, an infrastructure of language, of vocabulary, of understanding for it to really permeate throughout the organization. And I don't think a lot of companies do it well. I haven't seen many companies do it well. But again, it's just work that has to get done and reinforced kind of across all elements of an organization.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Ed, because that is literally perfect. Absolutely. Things are moving slow. I just dropped an article that really does a good job of talking about exactly what Ed just talked about, that things are, you know, they're happening, but they're moving slow. And it does, there is some frustration. You know, there is myths around, they're just not there. And the pool, you know, we just can't get people to apply. So this article does a really good job of debunking some of those things and providing some resources to think about it. We're at time, so I'm going to hand it off to Katie. I just want to say thank you to our amazing panelists. What a wonderful conversation. I did drop some resources in the chat. Once we get off of here, they're gone. So please click on the links now so you have them saved to your desktop.
Thank you so much, Faustina. And I will just call that out to everybody one more time. There are resources that are in the chat. I know Faustina and I talked ahead of time about getting a couple of resources, especially to our budding entrepreneurs, that are free, about educating your peoples, right, about intercultural competence. This session was recorded today too, as you know, and so you'll have this to refer back to if you'd like. So, you know, as closing, I'd like to thank you so much, Faustina, for being with us here today. I want everybody to know that Faustina will be running a couple of trainings for our entrepreneurs to kind of continue this conversation into the new year. We are in the process of solidifying dates for that, and we will get those out to our community as soon as possible. But stay tuned because we will have Faustina back, which will be great. And huge thanks to our panelists today, TaLaya, Ed, Adam, you know, for all of the insights and tangible takeaways you shared with the audience today. I think there was a lot of talk about action, right? And that's really what it takes. It takes a lot of action. It takes being deliberate and intentional about what it is you do within your organization to get others to really buy in, right, to the overall mission. So thank you so much for your honesty, your vulnerability, and sharing your stories with us. That was incredible. At this time, I'd also like to thank Dan and Jeff McCarthy for helping us host important events like today's through the McCarthy's Venture Mentoring Network. And I'd like to thank my incredible colleague, Wendy Eaton, our Venture Mentoring Network's program analyst and virtual community manager. She is amazing and made sure that we had a seamless experience in today's virtual venue. Thanks again for joining us today, and thank you for choosing to celebrate Global Entrepreneurship Week with Northeastern University. Virtual claps for everybody that participated on the panel today, as well as just the full week of programming we had. Thank you very much. We hope to see you again next year.